Hi, and welcome to Trauma Talk with Tina. I'm Tina. This is my outlet to share my experience, strength, and hope with others who have suffered from the effects of betrayal trauma. Hey there, today I want to talk about step 3, which says, we made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God as we understand Him. But first, I want to share a quote from Brene Brown from her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. It says, ordinary courage is about putting our vulnerability on the line. And that's exactly what we kind of have to do in step 3. And to show my own vulnerability, I'd like to share a story. So after my divorce, I went back to school to get my teaching degree. And of course, I had to put my 3-year-old son in daycare. Well, I put him in the best daycare in town from all the reviews that I had heard. And he was there for a couple of months until one day I dropped him off and a little boy shoved my son. And since I was in the room, I just bent down. Okay, I guess I wasn't as kind as I want to think I was. And I said, don't push other children. Well, I guess another mother had seen this and she reported me to the owner of the daycare. So when I went back to pick up my son, the owner of the daycare called me into her office and I felt like I was going into the principal's office. She's like, I need to talk to you about something very important. And I was like, this small. I'm like, what could have happened? And I thought, what did my son do? No, it was me. She said another mother had seen me tell the other son not to touch my son and that it was her duty to take care of that and that I was not to talk to other children again. And she said it so nicely. She was very professional, but at the time I was filled with such shame that I couldn't stand it. And what we call shame shift, I shame shifted on her and I said, well, if you ran a good daycare, then kids wouldn't be pushing each other. And she's like, well, kids will be kids and we can't stop every push and shove from happening, but we do take care of it as best as possible. And I was so ashamed that I told her that my father is an attorney and that I will take her to court if she doesn't give me a refund immediately. And she was like, okay. And it was at the beginning of the month, and so I had just paid her like 2 days prior. And she's like, well, I'll have to find out what I can do about that. And I said, fine, let me know when you have my refund check for this month, and I will be taking my son. And she's like, okay. Well, she called me a couple of days later, and she had a manila envelope, and she handed it to me and I left all in a huff. I was just so prideful and so upset about this. And it wasn't until a year later that I opened up the manila envelope and it actually had a check for my refund. I thought she was just going to hand me the check, but no, it was in the envelope. And I was so ashamed that I didn't even open up that envelope to find out what was in there. I thought it would have like scathing letters or something from her attorney to mine or something like that. And by that time, that a year later, the check had expired. And then I thought to myself, well, I behaved so horribly anyway. I'm not even going to try to cash this check or deposit it. And so that was definitely a learning moment for me in my journey, and it's one of the patterns of behaviors that I would get frustrated at myself. I didn't know what was happening inside me. I didn't know the term shame shifting. I didn't know that's what I was doing. I just felt like I was being controlled by this anger and that life was out to get me, and I felt shame for being divorced, a single mom, and a complete failure. So it wasn't until I started going to therapy and working the 12 steps and reading a lot of Brene Brown that I finally got the vocabulary to identify what was going on inside of me. When I got to step 3, again, being turning our will and our lives over to the care of our higher power, I realized that maybe I hadn't completely done that in my life because I had always tried to control things for myself, just like in the story that I told you. And part of me thought, well, I love God so much, I don't want him to worry about me. I can take care of myself. And I also think that God wants us to take care of ourselves. Like God helps those who helps themselves. But I wasn't leaning on my higher power for help like I should have. So quick recap, step 1 is where we admit that we're not managing our lives very well. So it's that complete and utter surrender, hey, I need help. At the time of the daycare story, I figured I could do anything and everything because I knew what was best. But again, I was also frustrated with these patterns of behavior that weren't working out for me. Then again, in step 2, we work on understanding what our sobriety is and what we can do to self-care and realize that God can help us break those bad patterns of thoughts and feelings that lead us to make poor decisions. So once we admit that we're powerless and that we believe that God can return us to sanity, we turn our lives over to God. We stop playing God in our own lives. We get out of our own way. So maybe going back to the daycare situation, I could have stopped, had I had the skills, I could have stopped, take a few breaths, count to 100 because 10 never works for me. Count to 100, hug my son, and walk out of the daycare believing and asking God to just protect my son throughout the day. That would have probably been a lot better than what I really did. In step 3, we give our whole selves over to our higher power and trust in him that he will guide our paths. That means, again, we got to get out of our way, but that we understand that God knows our character defects as well as our assets. God knows that I have a hot temper and I have deep, deep shame. And I need to be able to give that over to him so that he can help me make better choices in my life. I know I wondered what went so wrong in my life that I came to a state of complete helplessness and hopelessness. How did I get here? And when the second event of betrayal trauma happened in my life, shame flooded me like a tsunami. In the big book written for Alcoholics Anonymous, when they talk about step 3, they point out that many of us really try to play God in our own lives. And that means that we want to control everyone and everything. And it asks the question, why do we do this? Playing God and micromanaging life through situations and other people never works. I also didn't know that this is exactly what I was doing. I just thought I knew best in every situation. Everything that I did was the right way. I knew how everyone else in the world could get happiness if they just did what I did. Along those lines, a person's growth and journey are given to each of us to manage on our own as a gift from God. If we want to invite God into our lives, we have to ask for his help. God won't get in the way of our free agency, though. He's not going to force us to do what he feels is best. We have to ask for that first. And that's a big part of step 3. Telling him, hey, I'm going to turn my life over to you and I'm going to let you handle it. So whenever a hard situation comes up, I stop and think, okay, what would God want me to do in this situation? Well, he probably wouldn't want me railing and getting mad at little children. So what I need to do is calm myself down and ask for his help and guidance. In chapter 5 of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, it talks about step 3. It mentions that an alcoholic would be like an actor on a stage, but this actor wants to play everyone else's role. He wants to do the stage crew's jobs. He wants to play the music. He wants to be the director, and he wants to be the lighting manager as well. But that doesn't work, does it? We all need to play our own parts and do our own jobs. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, it says that this is very selfish, that the actor who tries to play everyone's roles and tell everyone else how to do their job is actually very selfish. And so if this actor actually gets to the night of the performance and he has tried to do everyone else's job because he thinks he knows best, and then the play doesn't go off as well as he expected, then he turns around and blames everybody else when he himself had taken control of everyone else's jobs. And that's an example, a metaphor of what they say as playing God, trying to do everybody else's job for them. And then we get upset when it doesn't work out, but we think we were doing what was right. And they say that even this actor looks very kind and generous, and people think that he's doing the best that he can and he's a good guy, but then turns around and acts all self-pitying, self-centered, and blaming and resentful when things don't turn out the way he had planned. And the fact is, we can't do that. Only God is the director. And so step 3, we're turning our lives over to our higher power and admitting, hey, I'm an actor, I'm not the director. Please direct my play. Please help me to make the best decisions in my life to lead a good life. I'd like to share a passage from Step 3 in Alcoholics Anonymous. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things happened. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and hereafter. We were reborn. And then they provide a step 3 prayer, which I would also like to share. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker as we understood him, quote, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Unquote. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. And I love that. For so long, I was living to avoid shame, living to cover up all the shame that I had felt from the divorce and being betrayed and my feelings of failure, that if I stopped that and focused on a higher power, a higher will, a life outside of myself, that a lot of my problems could go to my higher power and I could focus on serving others. Of course, we still need to focus on our fear and resentments and our character defects as well. We do need to pay attention to ourselves, and that's where self-care comes in. We need to monitor ourselves. But if we do it under the guidelines of our higher power, it gives us a little better focus and purpose. Steps 1, 2, and 3 tend to go together because they're mostly about us coming to our higher power. Steps 4 and 5 are about taking a moral inventory of our character defects and assets and sharing those with a safety person in our life, a sponsor or accountability partner. You can even share that inventory with a therapist. So stay tuned for next time when I talk about step 4. If you suffer from betrayal trauma, you're not alone. In fact, betrayal trauma is suffered by more people than you probably think possible. So look for more videos in the future, and feel free to leave any questions or helpful comments for others down below.